910, Big 550, KTRS. In terms of full disclosure, our next guest has been on the show numerous times, and I have always said to him that since he supports Nurses for Newborns, he will always have my support. Is that not correct, Congressman Todd Akin?
Yes, this is Congressman Todd Akin. It's a pleasure to join you again, McGraw, and your great audience.
And we should also say that we've been talking woodworking. Maybe we'll get to that somewhat a little bit later on, but I didn't know you were a woodworker.
Yeah, I like woodworking, cabinetry, but I like anything with using tools. Like I put a Buick engine in my MG, so anything with tools, that's my therapy.
All right, good. Well, you were an engineer, right? That's how you.
That's correct. Yeah.
Came up. Were you working with Boeing or for Boeing or?
No, I worked
for
IBM.
IBM. Okay.
Yeah, and then I was a combat engineer first, and then I worked for IBM.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're back. 2 years ago today was the election, right? Election day 2012.
I hadn't even caught up on that. Yeah, okay. Good for you.
2 years ago, you lost to Claire McCaskill in probably what has to be considered the country's one of the most talked about races 2 years ago. You're out with a new book called Firing Back, and this is your chance to tell your story.
Well, that's correct. Yeah, I watched over the last 2 years, and I saw all these different articles, things in the Wall Street Journal, or Karl Rove would write these things, and I'd go, well, that isn't what happened, and that doesn't make sense, you know. So I figured, well, okay, I was offered a chance to write a book. I thought I'd do it.
Right.
And the same logic that I was in 24 years in public service, same idea, and that is just try to get the truth out there and do what you think is right. We weren't trying to take any cheap shots at anybody, but just kind of lay down a basis of some of the things that are going on that just don't make a lot of sense. And so that meant that I made comments about the liberal media, and about the Senate leadership and Karl Rove, and a whole bunch of other things.
All right, so we wanted you on the show because it's a pretty interesting story, and it's somewhere along the line, I don't know how early or how late, it got away from everybody. And I think... And I went back the last couple of days and sort of reread some of the articles and sort of looked at the timeline, and it was so white hot, and there was so much spin from all over the place, your party included. You would expect that from the Democrats, but your party included, that it blew up, and it got so big, I think the truth got lost all in there. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think it certainly did, and we tried to stay on top of it, too. It was we cut the program on a Friday.
Right.
It ran Sunday morning.
Right.
People that I went to church with Sunday morning said they thought it was a good program. They didn't know at all, did they? And so Sunday evening, I'd had a chance for a little rest. I got a call from my assistant campaign manager, and he opens a conversation with DEFCON 1, Defense Condition 1, meaning we've got some trouble, okay? And that's Sunday night. And it just blew up from there. Monday morning, unusually, Obama, who never went into these press conferences, steps into one of his own press conferences, that one of his staff was having, takes apparently just a random call, a question from a reporter about Akin's comment about rape, and so he makes a comment. So that's Monday morning. Obama jumps in.
Right.
And the Republicans pretty much folded within a few days afterwards.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. We have the clip. We have the clip, right? So let's play the clip. This is from Charles Jaco, August 19th. Here's the question, and here's your answer.
If an abortion could be considered in a case of, say, a tubal pregnancy or something like that, what about in the case of rape? Should it be legal or not?
Well, you know, people always want to try and make that as one of those things. Well, how do you slice this particularly tough sort of ethical question? It seems to me, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. But let's assume that maybe that didn't work or something. You know, I think there should be some punishment, but the punishment ought to be in the rapist and not attacking the child.
Okay. Now, in your book, Firing Back, you think that was an unfair question that Charles Jaco asked?
No, I never said that was an unfair question. No. Basically, let me put the context of what was going on. Charles is a hard-bitten liberal. We knew that, and he'd been bugging me for months to get on his program, and I'd done it so many times I thought, well, even though I had advice, once you win that Senate primary the way we did, don't talk to any media at all, because this very thing could happen so easily. So he goes through a whole list of gotcha questions about, do you want to repeal the Civil Rights Bill? I don't know where he got some of these questions. Okay. And then he gets to the one on abortion, which it was pretty much a dead ringer. That's where he was going to go. And he says, well, and I've told him I'm pro-life, et cetera, et cetera. Well, should there be any exceptions? I said, well, in the case of a tubal pregnancy, it'll kill the mother, and the child has no chance of living anyway. So in my opinion, it's not intentionally taking the life of an innocent person. So then he logically jumps to rape. And this was on a Friday afternoon. I was a little tired, and I was not speaking very accurately. But the main question is this. His question, and this would be my answer to it, or way I would phrase the question, that is a child that's conceived in rape, do they have the same right to life as a child that's conceived in love? And my argument is, if you're pro-life and you're consistent, then the child should be allowed to live, and then the rapist should be punished very severely. So that was my point.
Right.
What I did was, unfortunately, got into a little parenthesis, and my point was simply, from what I understand, the stress involved in a rape tends to reduce the probability that the woman will become pregnant. Now, I've been on about 30 or 40 shows, and everybody argues back and forth on that. And I qualified it when I even said it. Some doctors think that, whether they do or not. Then, talking about taking my comments out of proportion, people are saying, well, Todd thinks people can't get pregnant when they're raped. Well, we had people working on our campaign that were the children of rape.
Right.
And they liked it because I was standing up for their life. And so they were working on our campaign. I never said that, and that's one of the things. The other question is so what does legitimate rape mean? It's probably an unfortunate putting some words together, but as a conservative, what would you think that means?
Right.
You can't say that this conservative thinks that rape isn't a serious crime.
Well, hold on a second. Back up a second. Okay, so that's Sunday. That airs Sunday.
Right.
You taped it Friday. You didn't think anything of it. Charles Jaco has come and said he didn't think anything of it. He aired it. And we do know that there are these people, Republicans have them, Democrats have them, these people who watch and read every sentence you say.
Yeah.
They caught it and ran with it Sunday night.
Well, here's what happened. The guy that caught it works for Soros. Okay. And he's the same guy that caught the guy running for Senate, Republicans, saying macaca.
Right. George Allen.
George Allen.
Right.
Now, George Allen doesn't know Portuguese, but macaca in Portuguese means monkey.
Right.
Okay? So they all of a sudden said he's making a racial slur.
Right.
Which is the same kind of thing. You try to take something and misunderstand it.
Sure. Okay. So Sunday night comes. That's the story. You mentioned Obama comes to the news conference.
Monday.
Mitt Romney comes out on Monday. And Mitt Romney says, and here's the quote from Mitt Romney, "Your comments were offensive and insulting, inexcusable, and frankly wrong." When that happens, when the head of the ticket turns your back, you have no hope, right? Because now all of a sudden, Republicans are now allowed to criticize and distance themselves from Congressman Akin.
Well, that's true. And I didn't know when Romney had made that comment. I thought it was further along.
I think it was Monday.
Was it really Monday?
It was Monday, yeah.
So that's right. So here we are saying, well, whereabouts, what are you going to do now?
Right.
Okay.
Now, back up a second. You go on Mike Huckabee's show.
Right.
And I want to say it was Monday. That Monday, I want to say.
I doubt if it was that quick. I think it might have been a couple days later.
Okay, well, I think that was your first interview, was with Mike Huckabee.
I think it was probably, yeah.
And Mike, you tell Mike Huckabee, and this is you mentioned that you said legitimate, but you meant forcible, and forcible rape and legitimate rape, and it lends the question, what is legitimate rape, and then what is forcible rape? And it seems to me like that word forcible has gone back and forth. What do you mean and others mean when they say forcible rape?
Well, I think that because I didn't use the term forcible rape, but I've heard many people use that. And that means that a woman is being forced physically.
Right, but is there anything other than a forcible rape? I mean, isn't rape by definition
No, and
forced?
that's the problem. It isn't, because you can have statutory rape, which was not forced, but the girl was so young that they call it rape.
Right.
Okay, so that's not a forced rape.
So you're saying a girl under 18 or under the legal consent isn't allowed to consent to sex because they're too young.
That's correct. And so that would be statutory rape. So legally, that's not forcible. And then, of course, you've got the shades of gray that somebody's drunk at the fraternity party and was it rape or was it not? So there's and increasingly in the law, they're having more and more trouble defining exactly what rape is.
Right.
I would have been far smarter, would just have said if a woman is raped, stress can play a part in whether or not the probability of her becoming pregnant. But even so, it was a distraction because the main point was a child conceived and raped, do they have the same right to life as a child? That was the point.
Todd Akin, our guest, and the reason why we're talking about this is your new book is Firing Back, and in your book you go step by step and sort of moment by moment and what you're thinking and what happens nationally, and so we're sort of talking about what's happening in your book. I don't want people to think that I'm grilling you. This is what's in your book.
Well, that's correct. And the one thing is, because people were interested in the comment that blew up the way it did, they tend to look at that, and there's a lot of chapters in the book. We cover that comment in the first chapter or two. Then the things that happen afterwards, are you going to stay in the race or not, and what's the logic of that?
Right.
And then as I move forward in the book, I have a lot of, see, I'd been in public office for 24 years, have a lot of points and tips for people like Tea Party people. Here's some things to pay attention to. Christian-type people, here's stuff that you need to be thinking about. I'm very critical of the Senate Republican leadership because of what they're doing in Mississippi. They try to do the same thing to me, but in a slightly different context. And that is, like Karl Rove and other people in the Wall Street Journal says, Akin proves that a conservative can't get elected to the Senate. So therefore, okay, well, first of all, that's a kind of faulty thing because for 24 years, I was an unapologetic Reagan conservative. I was reelected with good numbers, did good work for my constituents, and also at first.
But you were reelected in a very conservative district. There's no Democrat who is going to win that district anytime soon. Your better argument is you were ahead 49-43 the day before that comment came out.
Right. That's
so
correct.
You, if you wouldn't have said that, you would have won statewide election in a state where the Democratic candidate won the governor's race.
Well,
that's your argument.
Well, yeah, possibly. But also, here's the counter argument, because there's a lot of what ifs you can do, McGraw-Hill. Across the entire country, there wasn't a single Republican that beat an incumbent Democrat senator. So to say, well, we would have won, and that may be pushing it, and some people have quoted me as saying that. Certainly we would have done a whole lot better, but no Republican, whether they're liberal, conservative, whatever Republican, none of them beat incumbent Democrat senators in the last cycle.
Right.
So it was a tough cycle. Now but the point is, let me jump ahead. This is where I think the Senate Republicans are making a big mistake. Their leaders.
Hold that thought.
Sure.
I want to get to that. Todd Akin is our guest. His book is called Firing Back. Before we leave the segment, I want to ask you this other form of questions, and then we'll get to parts of the other book. And that is, you apologized for the statement. And now in the book, you've sort of said you shouldn't have said it. I want to ask you the question again.
Right.
Do you believe that a woman who was raped, a pregnancy that comes about by rape or incest, should that woman have a right to abort that fetus?
And that was the main thing I've mentioned twice already this morning, and that is, does a child conceived in rape have the same right to life as a child conceived in love? And my answer is yes.
So a child conceived in rape, the woman should be forced to carry that to full term?
Yes, and the rapist should pay a very, very heavy penalty for that.
And because the Catholic Church is very similar with your views.
Ronald Reagan was too, yeah.
Right. Even in the instance of rape and incest, that child is still a child, and so that's what sort of got lost in all of this.
That's really the big controversial question, and we had this tempest in a teapot sort of on a side issue.
Right.
Now, there are a couple points that would be kind of interesting to look at those. So you take a look, and this affects you because you're in the news business and free speech business. Mm-hmm. I'm on a program and misuse some words, poor choice of words, badly poor choice of words. Mm-hmm. Okay, now go 2 weeks further forward down your timeline. You got the Democrat National Convention. You got Bill Clinton, keynote speaker. Okay, now let's set aside Juanita Broaddrick's sworn testimony that she was raped by Bill Clinton. Let's just set that aside and say that doesn't even exist. Bill Clinton still had numerous occasions of sexual assault and sexual indecency on women. Now, was there any talk about that particularly? I mean, isn't there a difference between a poor choice of words, which became an international incident when I spoke, and the Democrat Party that's saying there's this war in women, and they're saying it's like, talk about throwing rocks in a glass house.
We'll get to that in a second. More with Todd Akin. His new book is called Firing Back, and he's firing back on the Big 550 KTRS. Todd Akin, former congressman, lost 2 years ago today to Claire McCaskill in what was one of the most talked about Senate races in a long, long time. What are Senate Republicans doing wrong, Congressman Todd Akin?
Well, here's what's going on. Like, for instance, in Mississippi, you have the party going in, the Senate Republicans, going in and selecting who they think is going to be the best candidate to run. So they're doing a selection as opposed to allowing for an election. Now, why is that dumb? I've said it's dumb. I think this is why. One, you're doing Republican money, and you're putting Republican money against Republicans. Why not save your money and use it in the general election? The second thing is that, let's say you're one of the guys that puts in yard signs, sets up Lincoln Days, or all of the grassroots thing that people do in a state. Right. You're supporting one guy, the party's supporting the other one. You're saying, why in the world would I ever give any money to the party anymore when they're using the money against a candidate that I'm choosing in the primary hasn't been held yet?
Are we watching the Republican Party fall apart? Are we watching a change in the political parties?
Well, I think you're watching a very bad mistake on the part of the Senate Republicans. The House Republicans aren't doing that foolishness, and I'm thankful that they're not. But the Senate Republicans have this arrogance thinking we can pick the candidate better than allowing the election process. So it's a selection over election, and it's this sort of big government, top-down attitude, which is really contrary to the way Republicans think. They tend to be a grassroots bunch of people. So I think that's destructive, and that particular part's destructive to the party.
Seems to me, Congressman Akin, that the Tea Party, which started out as a band of Americans who were upset, like-minded Americans who wanted to see things the way they wanted to see things and sort of banded together, it seems like they have been sort of co-opted, and sort of their ideas have been stolen, and they're being told to just sort of follow along again. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, the Tea Party was a very kind of an amorphous group as it formed, but I wrote the book Firing Back particularly for Tea Party people because I felt like my 24 years in politics, I could give them some pointers as to what to pay attention to, what's wrong, and where to fight. And so this book was written for those people to a degree. And yes, I do think they're very frustrated because of the fact that they put a lot of different people in office, and it didn't seem like Washington changed that much. And I think it was discouraging to them. Having been 12 years as a congressman, let me say that Washington is not a very easy place to change, particularly when you have a Democrat Senate. And I've seen that year after year after year. And that was part of the reason why I ran.
Ralph Nader has a book out. And basically the argument is that Republicans and Democrats are really not that different. Yes, maybe on abortion, maybe on some of those things. But really, when it gets right down to it, Todd Akin, are they really just the same side of the same coin?
I couldn't disagree more. I think the two parties are much farther apart than the public is aware of. It's not like you got two bell curves where the conservative Democrat kind of overlaps with the Republican conservative. I mean, a Republican liberal. The distance is massive in terms of how different they are, and that's why you have the gridlock in Washington. It's not that there aren't some decent people that can't talk and come to some agreement on things and put packages together and solve problems. It's because these two parties are really diametrically opposite. And so I couldn't disagree more. I think, and that's one of the things that I think Tea Party people and more conservative Republicans have to remember, that is, the Republican Party is still a mile different than where the Democrats are.
Outside of your initial gaffe with Charles Jaco, after that happened, what was your biggest mistake?
The next biggest mistake. Now you're trying to get me to admit to mistakes.
Well,
you're trying to get me in trouble.
I wouldn't mind you making a little news now and then.
Okay. Well, I think probably our tactical mistake, we went after Claire McCaskill because of all the millions of dollars her husband was making through the nursing home business on federal contracts. That was just too complicated. It was very sophisticated accounting, and I just don't think that message sold. I think we would have been much better just to tie Obama, that Claire McCaskill voted 98% of the time the way Obama wanted her to, and just tied her to Obama. That's what we should have done.
Should you have come out sooner and tried to explain? I know in politics when you're explaining, you're losing. But to sort of mitigate the clip, should you have come out sooner and talked to the media sooner to sort of start to try and get your side of the story out?
Yeah, there was a difference in our staff on this, McGraw. One point of view was get out in the media and say, look, this is a tempest in a teapot. Todd's just trying to say that it's a case where there's been stress induced on the woman, and he was making the case that stress can affect pregnancy rate. It's a kind of a minor point. And it isn't something I live or die on. It's just something that some doctors believe that.
Right.
But so you could have done that. Or the other thing was we flew immediately Monday morning to Ohio and cut a TV ad. Basically, it was like, I'm sorry for what you think I said.
Right.
Which I understand people believe that because that's what had been reported, but not in fact what I said or meant. And that was one of those kind of a toss of a coin, because on the one hand, you can say, look, I've apologized for that, we're moving on, because we didn't want the campaign to be about my comment. And that, of course, is what the Democrats wanted it to be about.
Right.
On the other hand, when you apologize and it wasn't a good enough apology,
Right.
And then you're admitting guilt. So it was one of those flip of a coin. Could have gone either way.
Sarah Palin asked you to step down. Ann Coulter asked you to step down. Roy Blunt asked you to step down. Paul Ryan asked you to step down. How close were you to actually stepping down and not running?
Well, you're talking to a guy who's an engineer. So I've got the piece of paper out, line down the center, and I'm sort of adding up, what's it look like?
Right.
As you mentioned, the numbers still look like there was a possibility we might win. If we did step down, I thought it's going to be very hard for somebody in a matter of a month and a half to put a campaign together and take out an incumbent Democrat senator.
Right.
The other thing that weighed heavily in my mind was the same point that I've mentioned where I think the Senate's getting it wrong, and that is we had a year and a half campaigning all over the state. I was outspent 4-1, but I still spent $2 million on that primary race. And voters all over Missouri that cared to watch or attend could have seen numerous debates, numerous discussions, and forums endless. And when it was all said and done, the Republican primary voters elected me by a large margin, and I considered that to be a trust, that they didn't trusted me to try to make sure that Claire McCaskill wasn't our senator. So that was a very high, that weighed highly in my decision to stay in. And then, of course, there's all sorts of other factors going on, but the bottom line, here's the short answer.
Yeah,
I asked myself, what's the right thing to do? The easiest thing to do was to step down graciously and sort of fade away. But my sense is this, that we never advance good and right and true ideas by backing away from evil and for things that are wrong. And for having me being torn up for something that didn't even make sense the way it was interpreted, and for the Republican Party not to have the backbone to say, yes, this whole thing about war and women, the Democrats own it. Look at Bill Clinton. Look at Hillary with this rapist that she's laughing about getting off the hook. Look at the Obama policy on abortion where they're doing gender selection abortions in India and China, killing the little girls so that the parents can have a male offspring. I mean, who's got the war of women? Why didn't they stand up and fight? And I felt like it's about time that people who are conservatives stand up for what they believe and just call out the Democrats and the liberal media for what it is.
You also called Roy Blunt a rhino. That's a pretty offensive word in Republican circles.
Did I do that?
Yes,
is that
did.
possible?
You haven't spoken to him in a while, have you?
We left in amicable terms. My whole theory, I'd been in politics 24 years, and I'm still doing political stuff. I never really carry grudges against people. I believe I'm in the business. I used to sell Big Blue for IBM. Now I sell ideas that make people free and prosperous and a chance to have joy in their lives. And I'm doing that in the context of ideas that are bad and evil and that leave people miserable and unhappy. And so I always felt like I was in a war of ideas, but I'm not in a war where I feel vindictive or bitter toward people. And I think that allowed me to keep kind of a cheerful attitude through the whole thing.
The book is called Firing Back. Todd Akin, our guest. I will say this, that many people say, elect me, I'm going to go to Washington, I'm going to change Washington. And the list of people who, when they retire, stay in Washington and become lobbyists is long. The list who comes home is very short, including you, Congressman Akin, right? You live here in St. Louis.
I live here in St. Louis,
You live in the area, right?
Yeah.
You went to Washington, and when you were finished, and when the voters told you were done, for whatever happened, you came home and you stayed.
That's correct.
The only other one I know is Senator Danforth, right?
Yeah.
All the others that I can think of, Republicans, Democrats, they all go to Washington, and they all belly up.
Well, and that's, I guess that depends where people think they have the job opportunities and all. I think people resent that a little bit, using your job as a public servant and then try to make money off it at the end. On the other hand, I just think I'm always going to be in trying to sell good idea business, and the book is an extension of doing that. But I do think, McGraw, that Firing Back is a great buy. It's a fast read. It tells a pretty interesting and exciting story of the campaign, how we won the primary and then lost the general. But it has a lot of information packed in there, and I tried to write it for somebody that thinks, I've never been in politics, I'm not a big and important person, I don't think America's on the right track, but I don't know what to do about it. And I tried to answer that question for people, how everybody needs to be in getting America back on the right track.
Are you ever going to run again?
I don't know. I just do what the next thing seems to make sense as we go along.
That's not no.
It's not no.
That's not no.
No.
Now let's talk about that white oak you have on your farm. Let's talk a little woodworking. Todd Akin, our guest. The book is called Firing Back. Bookstores everywhere, online as well. Todd Akin, best of luck. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure to join you once again, McGraw.
941. Big